The truth isn't found in the blinding flash of a bullet, but in the slow, agonizing silence that follows a child's simple question. You watch a man who built an empire on blood and lies, only to find the empire itself is his cage, and the key is forged from pure, unadulterated guilt. If you've ever wondered what it costs to live a life fueled by unchecked power, you need to hear the rest of this story. Subscribe now, because sometimes the silence is louder than any confession. The gold ring, the symbol of everything he was, wouldn't just be removed. It would become the weight that pulled him down into the darkness he had created. Don Silvio Moretti sat behind a mahogany desk large enough to host a small conference, yet he felt entirely alone. The office overlooked the Manhattan skyline, a glittering testament to the deals, compromises, and definitive actions that had constructed his life. 60 years of ruthless acquisition had left him with an undisputed legacy and a persistent, dull ache behind his sternum. He was not merely respected, he was feared, a relic of a time when loyalty was everything and betrayal was fatal. His world was structured, hierarchical, and brutal. He preferred it that way, perhaps because structure was the only thing preventing his internal decay from manifesting externally. Today, however, that perfect order had been disturbed by the only person in his vast organization who did not fear him. A 10-year-old boy named Leo. Leo was the unwanted consequence of an old war. The orphaned son of a rival Silvio had eliminated a few years prior. Silvio, in a strange twist of calculated guilt and strategy, had taken the boy in, placing him under the protection of his estate in upstate New York. He rarely saw Leo, preferring the sanitized distance that allowed him to believe he was doing a good deed without having to look at the living embodiment of his sins. But Leo was persistent, sharp, and possessed an unsettling innocence that cut through Silvio's defenses like a diamond blade. The boy had somehow slipped past the guards and his secretary, standing now near the grand fireplace, clutching a worn hardcover book. "They said you know everything, Don Silvio," the boy stated, his voice quiet but steady. Leo didn't fidget. He simply watched, his wide dark eyes absorbing the opulent details of the room that existed only because of his father's death. Silvio felt the familiar tightening in his jaw. The boy's directness was exhausting. "I was reading about the city's history, the people who got rich, the people who got away." Leo paused, his small hand gesturing toward the window, where the distant lights sparkled. The moment stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken implications. The truth that Leo was circling was the core doctrine of Silvio's existence, the foundation of the empire he commanded. Silvio lowered the financial report he was pretending to read, his gaze settling on the ornate gold ring on his right hand, a heavy piece bearing the Moretti crest, passed down for 3 generations, a seal of absolute power. Leo took a tentative step closer, the firelight catching the earnestness in his face. The child's next words sliced through the accumulated silence of decades, demanding an answer that Silvio knew would shatter the illusion of his own righteousness. "Please, sir, tell me why bad people win." Silvio's hand tightened into a fist on the desk. The fear he felt wasn't of exposure or danger, but of contamination. If he spoke the truth, he would taint this innocent soul. If he lied, he would taint himself further. He looked at the boy, then down at the ring, the tangible anchor of his malevolent victory. In a gesture that was both a surrender and a definitive choice, Silvio slowly began to twist the heavy gold band. It was a difficult, painful rotation, the metal catching slightly on the thick, age-worn skin of his finger. The simple act felt monumental, revealing a brutal hidden truth about power and consequences that transcended any verbal answer. The child waited, completely still, for the silence to break. If you found yourself hooked by the silence, let us know where you're watching from. Comment below with your city and country and join us in uncovering the truth. The silence after the ring was placed upon the dark, polished surface of the desk was absolute. The gold object looked isolated, heavy and strangely mute, no longer humming with the terrible energy of command. Silvio felt the cold air immediately rushing to the bare skin where the ring had rested for over 40 years. It was an absence, a sudden physical vacuum. The act of removal had been his unspoken answer. The cost of winning was the loss of humanity, symbolized by the weight he had just shed. Leo did not blink. His eyes dropped from the Don's face to his hand. The skin beneath where the ring lay was paler, almost sickly white, contrasted starkly by the sun-weathered roughness of the rest of his fingers. But it wasn't just pale. There was a faint, star-shaped mark, an old scar, barely visible, that the massive crest of the ring had always concealed. It was a pinprick of imperfection on the hand of a man who demanded absolute perfection. This small, forgotten injury was the first real, tangible clue Leo had ever received about the boss's hidden truth. It wasn't an answer about justice, but a physical remnant of a pain that preceded the power, a sign that the man before him had suffered long before he became invincible. Silvio felt Leo's probing gaze, reading the map of his hidden history. He pulled his hand back quickly, hiding the vulnerability by reaching for a glass of water. "Some people don't win, Leo," he finally said, his voice a low rasp, devoid of its usual intimidating resonance. "They simply survive long enough to watch the world try to catch them." He knew he needed to get the boy out, to re-establish the necessary distance. The encounter had unmoored something vital within him, a necessary illusion of control. He buzzed the intercom. "Maria, please take Leo back to the estate and ensure he is not disturbed." Leo didn't protest the dismissal. Instead, as Maria, a stern, impeccably dressed woman, entered the room, the boy looked one last time at the solitary gold circle gleaming under the office lights. He had asked for a philosophical truth, but he had been given a secret. The scar, the quiet admission of pain, was a piece of evidence. As the door clicked shut behind the boy, Silvio felt a distinct shift in the air, the heavy scent of aged wood and expensive whiskey suddenly laced with the metallic tang of immediate concern. The isolation of the office was shattered by the ringing of a secure line phone, the red one reserved only for emergencies. He hesitated only a fraction of a second before lifting the receiver. The voice on the other end was frantic, confirming the exact thing Silvio feared. The moment he took off the ring, the fragile balance maintaining his world had cracked, inviting trouble. The voice on the secure line belonged to Antonio, Silvio's longtime financial lieutenant. Antonio's usual tone was clipped and confident. Today it was laced with a thin, almost hysterical panic. "Don Silvio, they are moving. We confirmed 3 transfers, significant amounts. They used the old system, the one only he knew." Silvio's focus narrowed immediately. The world of philosophy and existential dread vanished, replaced by the cold, tactical calculation required for survival. "Who, Antonio? Be precise." "Your nephew, Giancarlo. He's making a play. He sees the opening." Giancarlo, the chosen successor. Silvio had cultivated him, taught him the brutal mathematics of power, and trusted him, or at least trusted him to be pragmatic enough not to strike until Silvio was dead. The removal of the ring, A gesture of emotional vulnerability meant only for a child must have been misinterpreted. To Giancarlo, who craved the Moretti mantle, it would have signaled weakness, or worse, abdication. The old system Antonio mentioned was a clandestine network of shell companies designed to move assets rapidly in the event of a total systemic collapse, known only to the boss and the immediate heir. Giancarlo was preemptively dismantling the structure, grabbing the core funds. Giancarlo always had ambition, but never patience, Silvio muttered, hanging up the phone without another word. The scent of ozone and impending storm seemed to filter into the sealed office. The weight of the gold ring, sitting innocently on the desk, now felt like a heavy accusation. He had spent his life shielding the business from external threats, law enforcement, rivals, informants. But he had failed to guard it from the most predictable enemy, the heir waiting in the wings. Silvio walked to the massive window, his reflection staring back, a tired man wearing an ill-fitting suit of invincibility. Giancarlo's move meant two things: financial devastation and, more importantly, immediate physical danger. A power grab in their world was never quiet. It required a dramatic, permanent severance of the old leadership. The question Leo asked, "Why do bad people win?" suddenly felt terrifyingly immediate, not philosophical. Giancarlo was trying to prove the premise true, and Silvio was now the obstacle. He grabbed the ring, sliding it back onto his finger. It clicked into place, snug and familiar, restoring a perverse kind of equilibrium. He looked out at the city lights. He needed to find Giancarlo, but first, he needed to secure his most vulnerable asset. Not the money, not the businesses, but Leo. The boy carried the shame of Silvio's actions, and Giancarlo, knowing Silvio's strange sense of obligation, might use the child as leverage. He picked up his primary phone and issued a single terse instruction to his head of security. "Secure the perimeter upstate. Move Leo now. Use the protocol. Do not fail." Upstate, at the sprawling estate, the security team moved with a hurried, focused precision that immediately registered as abnormal to Leo. He was sitting in the library, drawing geometric shapes on a notepad, when a guard, usually quiet and distant, approached him with a tension that felt like taut wire. Maria, the secretary, looked distressed, her face losing its usual composed mask. The change was palpable, the silence of the sprawling, insulated manor suddenly vibrating with low-frequency dread. "Leo, we are going for a drive," Maria said, trying to sound normal, but her voice was strained. "It's late," Leo observed, noting the darkness outside the tall windows. "Don Silvio said I shouldn't be disturbed. Circumstances have changed, child. Grab your jacket." Maria's grip on his arm was firm, almost painful. They rushed him through the back halls toward the hidden garage, where the black armored SUV was already running, its engine rumbling impatiently. The air in the garage was thick with the scent of diesel and panic. As they drove away from the main house, Leo saw the flash of headlights approaching from the main road, moving too fast, and without the official recognizable security escort. Meanwhile, back in the city, Don Silvio received the grim report. Giancarlo had mobilized quickly. The nephew had successfully intercepted two crucial transport routes, proving he had loyalists embedded deeper than Silvio had ever suspected. But the most immediate and painful loss was personal. Antonio, the lieutenant who had called him, was found severely injured. He had been submitted to cruel treatment, demanding the codes to the main vault. Antonio, loyal to the end, had not survived the interrogation. The brutality was a clear signal. Giancarlo was not playing for control. He was playing for annihilation. Silvio felt the familiar cold knot of righteous fury mixed with self-loathing. He had allowed his own blood to become this poisonous, believing his control would last forever. He looked at the reflection in the window again, seeing the powerful boss, but feeling the fear of the orphaned child he once was. The ring on his finger was a mocking weight now, a reminder that the cost of winning was that everyone around him eventually lost. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. The boy had forced him to remove his shield, and the moment it was gone, the wolves had struck. Now the priority was not revenge, but defense. He needed to ensure Leo escaped the consequence of his leadership. We are quickly approaching a massive milestone on the channel, almost hitting 1,000 subscribers. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the true cost of power and the silence of a mafia boss, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us tell more intense, complex stories like this one. Help us reach our goal so we can keep bringing you content that hits different. The armored SUV carrying Leo and Maria sped through the rural darkness, the driver pushing the heavy vehicle past its limits. They were using back roads, avoiding the main arteries, adhering strictly to the emergency protocol Silvio had established years ago, a ghost route known only to a few trusted drivers. Leo sat silently, not crying or panicking, but observing. He noticed Maria's white-knuckled grip on the seat, the driver's nervous glances in the rearview mirror, and the way the shadows outside seemed to press in on the vehicle. The fear of adults was far more unsettling than any abstract threat. Suddenly the driver swore sharply, pulling the wheel hard to avoid a makeshift barrier. 2 unmarked cars blocking the narrow tree-lined road ahead. They were cornered. Maria immediately reached under her seat, pulling out a slim, functional satellite phone, her demeanor shifting from distressed secretary to hardened operative. She knew this was the checkmate. She quickly dialed Silvio's private number, her voice tight. "Don Silvio, we are pinned down on Route 17. Giancarlo's people. They knew the route." In his Manhattan office, Silvio heard the words that confirmed his failure. Giancarlo had not only anticipated his moves, but had corrupted the very foundation of his trust, the emergency protocol itself. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial losses. Just then, Silvio's main computer screen flickered, activating an encrypted, unsolicited video feed. Giancarlo's face appeared, youthful, arrogant, and unsettlingly calm. He was leaning back in a chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Uncle," Giancarlo began, his tone mockingly respectful. "You should know that when you are the king, you must always look over your shoulder, especially when you show weakness." He gestured slightly off camera, and the feed switched to show the back of the SUV where Maria and Leo were trapped. The dark shapes of Giancarlo's enforcers were visible closing in. "The boy is an anchor, uncle, a liability," Giancarlo continued, his voice hardening. "This is my offer, my ultimatum: abdicate completely. Transfer the digital authority and the remaining assets to me by sunrise. In exchange, I let the boy go. I'll send him far away, where you can never find him, but he will be safe. Keep the child, and you force my hand. And believe me, the consequences will be unpleasant for everyone involved." Silvio stared at the screen, the rage boiling into a deadly coldness. He had 2 hours until sunrise. He could transfer the remaining wealth, lose everything, and condemn himself to a powerless, hunted retirement. But save the boy. Or he could fight back, risking Leo's life to prove the boy's original question wrong, that sometimes The bad people don't win. The decision was instantaneous and agonizing. The truth he had tried to shield Leo from now demanded a sacrifice of unparalleled magnitude. Silvio's hand, still bearing the symbolic weight of the Moretti ring, slammed down on the desk, cutting the video feed with a sharp, decisive motion. He chose neither abdication nor direct confrontation. He chose subterfuge. Giancarlo wanted the assets, the power, and the recognition. Silvio intended to give him the power, but hollow. He immediately contacted his oldest and most trusted associate, Marcus, a lawyer who had maintained a facade of complete distance from the family's operations for decades. Marcus was located thousands of miles away, enjoying a quiet retirement, untouchable by Giancarlo's reach. "I need an emergency corporate restructuring, Marcus," Silvio dictated, his voice regaining its command, now sharpened by desperation. "I need the entire holding structure to become a charitable trust for children's education. Name the beneficiary, the children of the city. Make the transfer of ownership irrevocable. Do this in the next 90 minutes. If Giancarlo takes control, he must inherit nothing but paper and debt." Marcus, recognizing the tone of finality, agreed without question. This maneuver was a definitive act of self-destruction for Silvio's empire, a total divestment of the material manifestation of his entire life's work. The empire he built on ruthless winning would dissolve, leaving Giancarlo scrambling for ghosts. But the immediate threat was Leo. Back on Route 17, the atmosphere inside the SUV was heavy with the silence of impending catastrophe. Maria was gripping a small device, her eyes scanning the approaching figures. She knew the armored vehicle could withstand small arms fire, but they couldn't hold out forever. Leo broke the tension. "What is that mark on Don Silvio's hand, Maria?" Maria, startled by the sudden shift in topic, hesitated. "What mark?" "The little scar under his ring. It looks like a star." Maria's face softened momentarily, remembering the old stories, the hidden wound that predated the Don's reign of power. That was his sister's doing, a long time ago, an accident during a difficult time. She quickly refocused. "Leo, listen to me. When I tell you to run, you run into the forest. Don't look back. Keep running until you hear sirens or find a main road. Can you do that?" Leo nodded, his eyes wide. He understood that the moment had arrived for him to either win or lose, not philosophically, but physically. He felt the cold air seeping in as the assailants began trying to pry the car doors open. The metallic groan of the door being tested was a violation, the danger finally immediate and deafening. Maria looked at the determined faces outside and knew the time for talk was over. She gave a silent signal to the driver. With the clock ticking toward sunrise, Silvio sat in his opulent office, executing the plan that would dismantle his legacy. He worked with the speed and efficiency of a man who had planned every possible catastrophe, only this one was self-inflicted. He watched the progress reports from Marcus trickle in, each confirmed legal step taking a chunk out of the Moretti holdings. The power was fading, the structures dissolving into legal abstractions. He was willingly reducing his empire to nothing more than air and guilt, guaranteeing that the bad person waiting to claim his throne would find it empty. He was trading his life's work for Leo's safety. It was the only way to answer the boy's question with a truth that transcended words. Meanwhile, the tense standoff at Route 17 erupted into chaos. Maria, recognizing the futility of waiting, made a tactical decision. She activated the external defense system on the SUV, a burst of thick, obscuring smoke and loud, disorienting sound, designed to create a momentary blind spot. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched whine mixed with the sudden acrid smell of burning chemicals. "Now, Leo, run!" Maria yelled, wrenching open the back door on the side facing the steep, forested embankment. Leo didn't hesitate. He scrambled out of the vehicle and immediately plunged down the slippery, debris-laden slope. The noise and confusion were intense, the trees offering scant protection. He could hear the shouts of Giancarlo's men, disoriented by the smoke, but quickly regaining focus. He pushed his small body through the undergrowth, the chilling night air stinging his face. He kept recalling Maria's instruction. Run until you hear sirens, or find a main road. The forest was dark, tangled and oppressive, filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. He ran for what felt like an eternity, the immediate danger spurring him forward. Then he heard a sickening crash behind him, followed by immediate silence, the sound of the armored car being violently breached. Maria and the driver were buying him time. He knew he was their only investment, and he could not fail them. He was running toward a hope he couldn't see, fueled by the terrifying realization of the stakes involved. The confrontation he had witnessed in Silvio's office was not just philosophy. It was a matter of life and death, an imminent consequence of winning the wrong way. We are so grateful that you've tuned in and followed Leo and Silvio this far. We produce these deep, intense stories completely free of charge, but we rely on your support to keep going. If you haven't yet, please help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by hitting the subscribe button below. With your support, we can guarantee more videos with high-stakes drama and emotional complexity. Leo stumbled out of the thick woodland, breathless, his clothes torn and muddy. He was shivering, the cold dampness of the forest clinging to him. He found himself on the edge of a small paved road, silent and empty, cutting through the vast rural land. He listened intently, but the only sounds were the pounding of his own heart and the distant, fading echo of the chaos he had fled. He started walking, his destination a desperate hope for safety, keeping to the edge of the asphalt. Meanwhile, Don Silvio had finished the final, irreversible transfer of assets. The Moretti Empire, financially, no longer existed. It was a paper tiger, a shell of its former glory. He now waited for Giancarlo's reaction. He knew the nephew would realize the deceit shortly after sunrise, when he accessed the main accounts. The moment of revelation would trigger a wave of fury and confusion among Giancarlo's newly acquired loyalists, buying Silvio a small window of opportunity. Silvio rose from his desk, the heavy ring still on his finger, feeling the strange lightness of a man who has willingly given up everything he spent his life acquiring. He had planned for his death, but not for this profound, calculated surrender. He grabbed an old leather satchel, quickly placing in it the few things he still valued, a handful of cash, a change of clothes, and the heavy hardcover book Leo had been holding. The City History book. He noticed a corner of the cover was bent, revealing a folded note tucked inside. He unfolded the note. It wasn't recent. It was written in a child's uncertain script, dated years ago, signed by Leo's late father, Marcus Rossi, the rival Silvio had eliminated. The note was not an accusation, but a memory. "Silvio, remember the star? You kept fighting even then. Don't ever let the fighting stop defining you." The star referred to the scar beneath the ring, the wound from his youth that Maria had mentioned. It was a fragment of shared history, a human connection that Silvio's life of crime had brutally severed. The irony crushed him. The boy's father, the man Silvio destroyed, was now, through this note, giving him the courage to face his end with honor. He felt a sudden powerful surge of resolve. He would face Giancarlo, not as the Mafia boss, but as the man who chose to protect a child over his entire legacy. He put the note in his pocket. He knew where Giancarlo would be waiting to receive his inheritance. At the old port warehouse, the original heart of the Moretti operation. Silvio had a deadline, sunrise. He needed to get there before Giancarlo discovered the empty vault. The time for running was over. The time for decisive consequence had arrived. Silvio found himself alone in the pre-dawn quiet of the Manhattan streets. He dismissed his remaining, potentially compromised security detail, choosing to rely on the ghost network he had built decades ago. He wasn't looking for protection, he was seeking an exit. He hailed an unremarkable yellow taxi, directing the driver toward the old industrial port district, the place where the Moretti family had first carved out their territory. During the journey, the world outside blurred, but the world inside Silvio's mind was painfully sharp. This was his dark night of the soul. Stripped of his wealth, betrayed by his heir, and facing an inevitable final confrontation, he was left only with the knowledge of his choices. He thought of Leo's question. Why do bad people win? He had won, comprehensively, taking everything from everyone, including the life of Leo's father. Yet here he sat, empty, alone, facing a humiliating and possibly fatal end engineered by his own student. Winning had only ensured he lived long enough to suffer the ultimate consequence of his immorality. The ring felt heavier than ever, a useless burden of authority when the authority itself was gone. He looked at the subtle scar beneath it, the one Leo had noticed. He remembered the pain of that childhood injury, the quick, sharp betrayal of a loved one's carelessness, a wound that had hardened him. He realized now that he hadn't worn the ring as a symbol of power, but as a perpetual bandage, hiding the one piece of vulnerability he could never accept. The removal of the ring had been the first honest act of his adult life. Silvio focused on Leo, running alone in the dark forest. That boy was the last living consequence of his life he cared to protect. He recognized the terrible, desperate resolve in the child's eyes when he looked at the ring, a young soul searching for clarity in a world of corruption. Silvio was not fighting to reclaim his throne. He was fighting to provide an answer, a demonstration that the cycle of inherited corruption could be broken, even if it cost him everything. He pulled out the note from Marcus Rossi again, reading the words, "Don't ever let the fighting stop defining you." Marcus, the rival, had seen the man beneath the monster. Silvio allowed himself a moment of genuine, agonizing remorse. He had destroyed a good man and tried to replace him with an echo of his own sin. Leo. The confrontation ahead wasn't about victory. It was about defining the terms of his defeat, ensuring that the last thing he did was good. He told the cab driver to stop 2 blocks from the main warehouse, stepping out into the cold, salt-laced air of the harbor. The port of the city was silent under the deepening gray of the coming sunrise. The air was thick with the scent of salt, exhaust fumes, and the heavy metallic smell of industry. Silvio walked with an economy of movement, his years of command training kicking in. He was exposed, alone, but entirely focused. The warehouse was unmistakable, a massive, rusted structure that had witnessed the birth and the decay of his power. He entered through a side access point, finding the interior dimly lit by emergency lamps. Giancarlo was there, standing with a small group of his most trusted newly acquired men, surrounding a large, reinforced steel vault door. Giancarlo looked impatient, dressed in an expensive suit that already looked too big for his new role. "Uncle Silvio," Giancarlo said, a note of triumph in his voice. "I admire your resolve to face your fate. I thought you would be on a plane to South America by now. I came to see what you won, Giancarlo, Silvio replied, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. I won everything, Uncle. The network, the loyalty, the future. Giancarlo gestured toward the vault. Now I just need the final code to secure the treasure you were hoarding. He paused, his gaze dropping to Silvio's hand. Ah, the ring. I see you put your crown back on. Good. It's fitting you wear it when you officially pass it to me. The irony was unbearable. Giancarlo was celebrating a hollow victory. Silvio simply smiled, a genuine, unsettling expression that conveyed exhaustion rather than amusement. The code is not in my head, nephew, Silvio stated calmly. It's in the system. The transfer of authority should have been completed moments ago. Try it. Giancarlo, eager and slightly unnerved by Silvio's composure, ordered his tech specialist to input the new credentials. The specialist worked quickly. Silence descended as the system whirred, attempting to verify Giancarlo's new authority. Then a small red light flashed on the digital reader, accompanied by a soft, insistent beep. Access denied, the specialist reported, looking confused. Giancarlo's face went white with confusion, then crimson with immediate, violent understanding. What did you do? I answered the boy's question. Giancarlo, Silvio said, removing the ring once more, placing it on a nearby crate. This time, the gesture felt like a final sentence. Bad people win nothing of lasting value. I gave up the illusion of power to secure something real. I destroyed the entire structure. The money is gone. The assets are a charitable trust. You inherit dust and debt. The realization hit Giancarlo with physical force. He had committed treason, betrayed his own family, and risked everything for an empty shell. The warehouse filled with a terrible, explosive tension, the sound of Giancarlo's strangled fury replacing the quiet anticipation of the sunrise. Giancarlo's rage was a sudden, terrifying collapse of composure. The betrayal of the inheritance was a wound, but the calculated, dismissive nature of Silvio's action was the ultimate humiliation. His eyes, burning with hatred, fixed on Silvio's calm, almost serene face. You traded an empire for a child of your enemy? Giancarlo spat, disbelief warring with fury. I traded a lifetime of lies for one moment of truth, Silvio corrected, standing his ground. He had faced down prosecutors, rival bosses, and assassins, but facing the consequence of his own blood was the heaviest burden. The nephew, realizing his total defeat, made a desperate, final move. He lunged forward, not for the ring but for Silvio, driven by the need to physically erase the man who had tricked him. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Silvio, though aged, had not lost his sharpness. He knew how the struggle would end. In the scuffle, Giancarlo became severely injured. The confrontation was fatal, a necessary violent conclusion to the question of who would control the emptiness left behind. As the noise subsided, the remaining men loyal to Giancarlo realized they were now serving a ghost. Their faces registered the chilling clarity of the situation. The old boss had not just been usurped. He had committed financial suicide, taking the entire operation with him. With no money, no structure, and the immediate leadership eliminated, the men scattered into the rising dawn, the instinct for self-preservation overriding any temporary loyalty. Silvio stood alone, beside the now quiet vault. The sunrise began to spill through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, transforming the grimy warehouse into a strangely sacred space. He felt the pain, the profound exhaustion, but also a fragile sense of closure. He retrieved the gold ring from the crate, looking at the intricate crest one last time. It was a symbol of a brutal past he had finally severed. He didn't put it back on. Instead, with a trembling hand, he tossed the heavy gold object into the oily, dark waters of the harbor basin, where it sank without a splash, disappearing beneath the accumulated filth and secrets of the docks. He had paid the ultimate price for his life, but he had ensured that his successor, Giancarlo, would not win, and that the only remaining symbol of his terrible decision, Leo, was now, hopefully, safe. The question, "Why do bad people win?" had been answered not through philosophy, but through a painful public undoing of every victory he had ever claimed. Silvio left the warehouse, blending seamlessly into the morning rush of dock workers and early traffic. He had called the authorities anonymously, reporting a confrontation at the abandoned warehouse. He knew they would find evidence of the disaster, the remnants of Giancarlo's play, but the true treasure, the wealth, was beyond their reach, safely tied up in charitable foundations. His own identity as the Don had been successfully erased with the destruction of his financial signature. He was just an aging man walking away from a life he could no longer afford to live. He found an anonymous coffee shop downtown, the scent of fresh brew and sugar offering a stark contrast to the metallic air of the port. He sat at a small table, watching the city awaken, feeling the strange, hollow relief of survival. He still carried the heavy book Leo had been reading, and the faded note from Marcus Rossi remained in his pocket, the only physical proof of the human cost of his choices. Days later, in a small, quiet town hundreds of miles away, Leo was found by a compassionate social worker. He was unharmed, if exhausted, but crucially, he was alone. He told them very little, only that he had run away from a large house and gotten lost. Maria and the driver, having been subjected to intense treatment by Giancarlo's men, were eventually rescued, having only suffered serious injuries. They were silent about the details, fiercely protecting the Don's final act. Silvio, now using a new fabricated identity, found quiet work far from the city. He lived simply, without the weight of the ring or the burden of command. He still read the city history book, often stopping at the folded note, remembering the simple, terrifying question that had spurred his transformation. He had been a bad person who had won for decades, but the ultimate victory had been achieving a defeat that was, paradoxically, honorable. He never contacted Leo. He knew that the greatest protection he could offer the boy was distance, a chance for a clean life, free from the shadow of the Moretti legacy. Leo's education was secure, funded by the anonymous trust. The boy would never know the full extent of the sacrifice made for him, only that he survived. Years passed. Leo grew into a thoughtful, quiet young man. He was studying history, always fascinated by the rise and fall of power structures. One day, while browsing old newspaper archives for a research project, he saw an article about the mysterious disappearance of Don Silvio Moretti and the simultaneous collapse of his vast, illicit empire. The article mentioned a vast, sudden charitable fund that had materialized, benefiting local children's education. Leo looked at the faded picture of the former Mafia boss, remembering the opulent office and the silence after the ring came off. He finally understood the unspoken answer. Bad people win until they realize the true cost of their victory is the loss of everything that matters. Silvio, sitting alone in a small apartment, traced the faint, star-shaped scar on his ring finger. The skin was no longer pale, weathered now by honest work. The absence of the ring was no longer a symbol of abdication, but a daily reminder of a choice that finally, truly, made him free.